Since the election, I think something important has changed in UK property. And honestly, the more I think about it, the more I realise this isn't just about house prices anymore. Because for years, property investing largely felt like this: buy property, wait, and eventually prices rise. But now, I think politics is starting to reshape the property market itself. I don't think most people fully realise how significant that could be. Because when housing becomes unaffordable, rents keep rising, younger generations feel locked out, and millions of people feel financial pressure. Property stops being an investment issue, it becomes political. And once something becomes political, governments usually start to intervene, which is why I genuinely think the property game has just changed. I think a lot of new investors don't fully realise how different the environment used to feel. I remember periods where refinancing felt easier, valuations felt more generous, and rates were incredibly low. And there was this feeling that almost anything in property would eventually go up in value. And I think that environment shaped how a lot of people think about property today. Because when money is cheap, mistakes get hidden, average deals still work, risk feels lower than it really is. But now, I think the market is demanding much more discipline. The more projects I look at, the more I realise strategy now matters far more than optimism. I don't think housing is just an economic issue anymore. I think it's become emotional and political, because almost everyone now feels housing pressure in some way. High rents, high house prices, mortgage costs, adult children living at home longer. People feeling like owning a home is becoming harder than easier. And once something becomes politically emotional, governments usually become much more interventionists. I think this is why property feels different now. Because once housing becomes political, the rules around property start changing too. Now, for most people looking at this, you would probably just see a fairly standard one-bedroom flat. But this is where property investing gets interesting. Because when I look at the floor plan, I'm not just asking, would I live here or invest here? I'm asking, could this layout work harder? For example, this reception room is huge for a one-bedroom flat. So instead of having one oversized living room, could part of this space become an open plan kitchen diner? And could the existing kitchen become another bedroom? Because if the layout can be redesigned intelligently, suddenly this potentially becomes a two-bedroom flat instead of a one-bedroom. And this is where things get really interesting, because same building, same street, same market, but potentially completely different numbers. What's fascinating is that the comparable two-bedroom flat nearby is barely any bigger, yet the value difference is massive. I think that's where a lot of opportunity exists now. And the reason I'm helping someone look at this is because in tougher markets, investors start thinking differently. Instead of just hoping for price rises, they start asking, how do I create value? This two-bedroom flat is currently on the market for £450,000. It's literally only 2.7 square meters bigger. Now this one gets even more interesting, because again, most people would see this and say it's a pretty normal two-bedroom flat. But when I look at the layout, I immediately start asking different questions. Do we really need all this living space? Could the kitchen layout work differently? Could this become a three-bedroom flat instead of a two? I think this is where a lot of people misunderstand property investing. They think wealth comes from waiting, but often wealth comes from solving problems, improving layouts, and creating value where other people don't see it. This two-bedroom flat is under offer at £250,000. As you can see from the floor plan, they must have moved the kitchen into the living room to create an open plan kitchen diner. The open plan kitchen diner is huge. The only issue in my opinion is that the original kitchen was quite small. It was 5.5 square meters, which would have been too small for a bedroom. Add to the fact that it didn't have a window was the reason they decided to call it an office. This just shows you that these opportunities do exist. This one is on the market for £150,000 and could be worth at least £250,000 as a two-bed. As a three-bed, it could be worth even more. I think one of the biggest misconceptions in property is that wealth simply comes from waiting long enough. But increasingly, I think successful investing becomes less about waiting and more about thinking strategically. Because in tougher markets, strategy matters more than optimism. And interestingly, I don't actually think this mindset only applies to investors, because for most people, their home is one of the biggest investments they'll ever make. And I remember someone saying to me, your home isn't an asset, it's a liability. And the reason they said that was because your house costs you money every month. Mortgage payments, bills, maintenance. But over time, what I realized was that this viewpoint ignores something really important. Because once that mortgage is eventually paid down, for many people, their homes become one of the biggest stores of wealth they will ever have. I think investors who succeed over the next decade probably won't be the people chasing hype. I think there'll be people who understand financing, manage risk, create value, and stay emotionally calm when other people panic. Because I think the next phase of property investing becomes much more strategic. Because ultimately, I don't think the biggest risk going forward is property itself. I think the biggest risk is assuming that the environment around property won't change. I think investors who do the best over the next decade probably won't be the people who simply hope the market rises forever. I think it'll be people who understand risk better, buy more strategically, create value, and make better decisions when everyone else becomes emotional. Because I genuinely think the easy money era in property is over and the property game is changing. And honestly, I think the people who adapt early will probably benefit the most.